Acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land I'm working today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thanks very much, Paul, Liam and Luke, for the opportunity to talk about this. I'm taking the chance today, as I will on any occasion when it's available, to talk about how we might generate research findings out of our education work. And so this really dovetails quite nicely with the previous presentation in that respect. So in the time I've got, I'd like to talk about a few points. Firstly, how we might best plan for evaluation of our interventions in respect of generative AI in legal education settings, how we might tease out whether we're most interested in evaluating the process of developing and implementing these sorts of interventions or the outcomes we're achieving through them, what sorts of methods and data you might use in doing this work, what sort of outcomes are particularly of interest to you, and how to go about thinking through questions around collaboration, you know, who you might need to collaborate with, who you could collaborate with to get this kind of work done. Now, from this slide, I think you can probably guess that this is basically a crash course in empirical methods for evaluation research in like the 5 minutes I've got left, which is fine. I can work with that. But yeah, this is really what we're talking about, how you can generate research outputs out of this innovative work that so many of us are engaged in at the moment. So to think firstly about this question of planning for evaluation in terms of why evaluate, it's really beneficial, as I think this entire workshop illustrates, to generate evidence about the work you're doing and whether that effort has paid off, whether your efforts have worked, what others might learn about how to do things better or differently in their particular context. It also helps you to improve your own intervention, so to incrementally improve your own generative AI assessments and learning activities over time. My suggestion is that you approach doing evaluation of this kind of work as you would a research project. And, you know, and I know this is a familiar kind of a suggestion, but typically that starts with the research literature. I mean, the volume of educational research about generative AI that's being produced now is incredible, and so much of it is very practical and really readily applicable to our legal education context. So starting there is a really good plan. With respect to the lead time that you might need to put into planning for an evaluation, it's really important that you plan the evaluation before you implement your intervention, so that you think about how it is you're going to measure what you're doing and assess how it's performed at the same time as you are thinking about implementing those new learning activities or assessments. And the fundamental part of that approach, really thinking through your theory of change, you know, what it is that you're trying to achieve with your intervention and how it will contribute to the sorts of results you're trying to achieve through your changed education practice, is a really fundamental starting point. With respect to ethics considerations, I just mentioned that for those of us who are thinking about implementing new activities and assessments in the context of units where we're the CE or chief examiner in Monash terms, or unit coordinator or leader in other settings, there may be ethics considerations around whether it's appropriate for you to be the chief examiner and also the chief investigator of a research project where you're planning to include your students as participants in that research. Often ethics committees are concerned about coercion in recruitment of participants in research and a perception that a student might feel compelled to participate in your research because you have a role in determining their results through your teaching role in that unit. So it's an important consideration to bear in mind when you're thinking about how you design and set up educational research and evaluation. With respect to scale, I'd suggest that you really look for scale, you know, in terms of implementing this kind of evaluation strategy. What I mean by that is there an opportunity for you to introduce your intervention, your generative AI assessment task or learning activity or materials, whatever the intervention is, across multiple streams of a unit or maybe even multiple teaching periods. I put an asterisk on that because, of course, with the rapid development of GenAI, you know, the capacity to be confident that the same technology, same model is available from teaching period to teaching period might not be there. But I think it's always good to look for opportunities to test our ideas with larger groups of students than perhaps just the single stream that we might be teaching at a given period of time. And equally, if you know you're going to be involved over multiple teaching periods, having the opportunity to kind of pilot and refine your ideas before you embark on the sort of the large scale evaluation is a good plan. So in terms of process and outcome evaluation, there are sort of two different ways that we can approach what it is we're interested in assessing in an evaluation. And some of the discussion so far today has really reflected this. We think firstly about a process evaluation. We'd be thinking there about how our actual generative AI intervention has been delivered and whether we encountered any barriers to success. So these are ideas reflected in presentations where we're sort of talking about how people have developed approaches and implemented them and what's worked and what hasn't. So these are the sorts of questions we might think about with respect to a process evaluation. So whether things have been implemented as planned, how satisfied the participants are, what could be improved, those sorts of things. Another approach is an outcome evaluation where we look at links between the intervention and outcomes that might be of interest to us in our activities. So what the outcomes have been, whether the intervention actually contributed to a change in those outcomes, and what particular features of the program were important in generating the outcomes as well. So in terms of data collection and analysis, really it's critical to match your methods and data to the evaluation questions. So to come back to that idea of the theory of change and the research questions you're interrogating through your evaluation research. Often a mixture of qualitative and quantitative data is useful in this type of research setting, and the sorts of data collection strategies that are common in this kind of work, things like surveys and interviews and focus groups with students or staff. Student work, submissions can also be a kind of data source where we're looking at how students have performed on particular tasks, but also learning management system data, things like engagement logs or time that students have spent working with particular materials or on a particular task. That kind of administrative data is relatively underutilised in legal education research, and that's the sort of stuff that's being collected in the background all the time and might provide a useful source for this kind of work. I will just say on survey design, a number of colleagues have spoken with me recently about how they might implement a survey as part of the evaluation of their interventions using generative AI in their teaching. And I'd just say that simple is always best with respect to survey design, and I'd really encourage you to have a look at some of the online resources that are available with respect to survey design, and also to use existing tools that have been developed. Using validated surveys that others have developed and tested is a really good practice in this kind of work. Just finally on collaborations, I'd just say that there's huge opportunity with respect to generative AI to work with others, not only within your teaching teams and faculties, across units, but also across faculties within universities and beyond. I know that at Monash and elsewhere, there's lots of interest in how we can make the most of this technology in our teaching. And so the investment in kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration to really help us understand and do our best with it is really there at the moment. I'd encourage you to grab the colleagues that you have who have empirical and evaluation skills. I mean, I think it's always useful to get some advice on how to set things up from the outset for success with this kind of work. And I'd also really recommend to you the Better Evaluation website as a starting point for thinking through the kind of the fundamentals of evaluation research. So I'll stop there. Thanks, Paul.